You better move that car right now or I'll have it towed and you arrested. You have two choices. Either you hand over that car or I'll have it forcibly removed. Karen Green, the HOA president, was standing in front of my car, shouting at the top of her lungs like she was the queen of the block. Her finger was jabbing toward my windshield, her face as red as a tomato, and I could practically hear her yelling at the rest of the neighborhood to come and watch her take control. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Arrested over a parking spot. I had barely stepped outside to grab my laptop from the car, and now suddenly I was starring in this bizarre HOA showdown. Karen wasn't just asking me to move. She was ordering me, like she had some kind of authority over me. Like subscribe and share if you've ever had someone overstep their boundaries and try to control you for no reason. We've all had that one neighbor, right? Drop a comment below about your worst HOA experience. I'm Mark Chandler, a federal employee with over 15 years of experience in law enforcement. I know a thing or two about authority, and I've learned how to deal with people who abuse it. But even with all my experience, I never imagined it would be a battle like this. All I wanted was a quiet afternoon. Instead, I was about to find out just how far Karen would go to prove her power. Karen went on, rambling about some Regulation 47B, subsection 3, that I was apparently violating. Something about being too close to the mailbox. She was throwing terms around like they were some kind of gospel, and it felt like she was really trying to make a public spectacle out of this. Move that car, or I'll have you arrested, she repeated, her voice a mix of rage and satisfaction, like she'd just won some battle in her mind. I wasn't having it. I stood there, arms crossed, completely unfazed. I'm parked legally, Karen. This is a public street. The HOA has no authority over public parking, I said, keeping my tone even. That set her off even more. I don't care what you think. You're on my property and I have the power to have it towed right now. You better move it before I call the cops on you for trespassing. Now, I wasn't in the mood for this. But what happened next? That's when everything flipped. Karen pulled out her phone and without hesitation dialed 911, convinced that calling the police would be the final nail in my coffin. She expected me to be humiliated, to be hauled away in front of everyone for trespassing over a parking spot. She was so confident, she didn't even think twice. But what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just some random guy. I wasn't a neighbor she could walk all over. I had more than just the law on my side. I had federal credentials. Before she could even finish her call, I reached into my wallet, pulled out my federal ID, and casually showed it to her. You might want to think twice about that call, I said. The badge caught the light in a way that made her eyes widen. For a moment, Karen's face went from pure anger to confusion to panic. She stared at the ID, processing the realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. But of course, she wasn't going to back down just like that. No, Karen had to save face. I don't care if you're federal or whatever, she said, her voice losing the confidence it once had. This is private property, and I have the authority to have you arrested. I could feel the tension building. The neighbors were watching, half in shock, half in disbelief. The scene had escalated, and I wasn't sure how much further it was going to go. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't backing down, and I wasn't either. Then just when I thought things couldn't get crazier, the sirens started. I could hear the police car pulling up, the sound growing louder, and my stomach twisted with anticipation. Karen's face brightened at the sound, as if she'd won. This is it, she said, practically gloating. The cops will show you who's in charge around here. I stood there, arms crossed, my face calm. I was waiting for her to make the next move. I knew that no matter what happened next, this wasn't going to be the end of it. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was how this one confrontation would spiral into something much bigger. As the police car rolled up and Detective Maya Simmons stepped out, I could feel the atmosphere shift. Maya looked between the two of us, her gaze flicking from Karen to me, and for a split second, I thought maybe she'd side with Karen, just another HOA dispute to deal with. But when Maya looked at my ID, then back at Karen, her expression changed. And then Maya did something that completely caught me off guard, something I couldn't have predicted. The sound of the police sirens grew louder, and for a second, Karen's face lit up, as if she'd just won the lottery. I could almost see her thinking, "This is it. The cops are going to drag him away and I'll finally get my way." I stood there, arms crossed, trying to remain calm. But inside I could feel my heart rate quicken. I knew this wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. It had turned into a battle of wills. And I wasn't about to back down. The police car finally pulled up to the curb and I watched as the officer stepped out. Detective Maya Simmons looked about my age, maybe a little older. She had that confident, calm demeanor that comes with years of handling neighborhood disputes, like she'd seen it all before. She took one look at Karen, then at me, and I could already see the wheels turning in her head. "What seems to be the problem here?" Detective Simmons asked, her voice neutral. She was just trying to get the facts, but Karen wasn't going to make it easy. "This man is illegally parked," Karen snapped, gesturing at my car. "He's violating HOA Regulation 47B, subsection 3, about being too close to the mailbox. I want him to move or I'll have him arrested for trespassing." I let out a quiet sigh. Regulation 47B, subsection 3, another one of Karen's made-up rules. I knew she was bluffing, but I had to stay cool. Detective Simmons didn't even flinch. She turned to me. "Is this true? Are you in violation of this regulation?" I shook my head. "No, detective. I'm parked legally on a public street. The HOA doesn't have authority over public parking." I pointed at Karen, whose smug expression was starting to crack. She's been harassing me about this for the past few minutes. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. I pulled out my wallet, showing Detective Simmons my federal ID. "I'm Mark Chandler, Federal Interior Chief. I'm parked here to grab some work materials, not to break any laws." Detective Simmons took a moment to look at my ID, then back at Karen. Her gaze was sharper now. Like she could see right through Karen's story. "Ma'am, you do realize this is a public street, right? And HOA regulations don't apply to public parking spots," she said, her voice even but firm. Karen's face went pale. The crowd, which had been whispering and watching the whole scene unfold, suddenly went quiet. I could see Karen's mind racing as she tried to regain control of the situation, but "This is private property," Karen sputtered, now sounding less confident. "I have the authority to remove unauthorized vehicles." Detective Simmons raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, are you aware that you're speaking about public property? Because I'm pretty sure that's not how it works." I watched as Karen's expression went from anger to disbelief, her grip on the situation slipping away with every word. Her eyes darted between me and Detective Simmons, and for the first time, she looked like she wasn't sure what to do next. Before she could say anything else, a neighbor stepped forward. Mrs. Roberts, an older woman who lived a few doors down, cleared her throat nervously. "Officer, if I may," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Chandler isn't the first person Karen's done this to. She's been using her position to intimidate people for a while now. She threatened my son-in-law with fines for having his trash cans out a minute too early last week." I glanced at Mrs. Roberts, surprised by her sudden intervention. But Karen, now visibly rattled, shot her a dirty look. "That's none of your business," she snapped, but Mrs. Roberts wasn't backing down. "It is when you're using your authority to harass people. I've seen it myself, and I'm not the only one." Detective Simmons looked at Mrs. Roberts, then at me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if something was starting to click. "Is this true?" she asked me, now more focused. I nodded. "It's been happening for a while. She picks on people she thinks won't fight back." Detective Simmons turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, I suggest you stop with the threats. I don't know what's going on in this neighborhood, but you don't have the authority to do what you've been doing. If you continue harassing this man, I'll have to take further action." The crowd was silent now, everyone waiting to see what Karen would do. For a second, Karen just stood there, her face flushed with frustration. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to collect herself. "This isn't over!" she hissed through gritted teeth before turning and storming off down the street, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. Detective Simmons watched her leave, then turned to me. "I'm sorry about that. People like her make our job a lot harder than it needs to be." I gave her a nod. "I appreciate it. It's just hard to believe how far some people will go to control others." Detective Simmons looked over at the growing crowd, many of whom were still watching the scene unfold. Well, now they know the truth, and hopefully she'll think twice before pulling that stunt again. As she turned to leave, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't going to let it go that easily. This was only the beginning. The following days were a mix of uneasy silence and whispers among the neighbors. Everyone had seen the showdown with Karen, but now the tension was palpable. People were keeping their distance, likely unsure of what would happen next. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't someone who backed down easily, especially when she felt challenged. By Monday, I had my answer. I'd barely sat down at my desk when my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen and saw a text message from an unknown number. "You think you won? You'll regret this. Just wait." I stared at the message, the pit in my stomach growing. It was the kind of vague, ominous threat that left you wondering how serious it really was. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a joke. Karen had a long history of using her position to get what she wanted, and now it seemed like she was escalating. I put the phone down, trying to shake off the unease, but the message kept replaying in my head. The feeling didn't go away, and I knew I had to act. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I had a federal badge for a reason, and I had learned to follow through when something didn't sit right. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit the HOA office. It was a small building tucked behind a row of houses, barely noticeable unless you knew what you were looking for. Inside, the air was stale, the faint hum of a fluorescent light buzzing overhead as I walked up to the counter. A woman in her mid-30s looked up from her desk, her smile quickly faltering when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to sound professional but clearly on edge. "I'm here to speak with Karen Green," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's about the parking incident from Sunday." The woman's eyes widened, but she nodded and stood up. "She's in her office. I'll let her know you're here." A few moments later, Karen appeared, her face tight with frustration. She had clearly been expecting this, but seeing me in person was another thing. I noticed the slight shake in her hands as she greeted me, trying her best to look composed. "Mr. Chandler," she said through clenched teeth. "I'm surprised to see you here." "I'm not here to argue about parking," I said, cutting to the point. "I'm here to talk about your actions. You've been making threats, texting me, using your position to intimidate others. And I'm not the only one." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she didn't back down. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, a little too quickly. "I have every right to enforce the rules of this community." "Enforcing the rules is one thing," I replied. "But when you start threatening people, when you make false claims and try to use your position for personal gain, that's another thing entirely. And I'm not the only one you've done this to." She hesitated for a moment, looking around as if trying to decide whether to stand her ground or retreat. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook. "You've been harassing residents like Mrs. Roberts and others in this neighborhood. It's time to put an end to it." Karen took a deep breath, her eyes darting to the side as if searching for an escape. "You don't know what you're dealing with. This community relies on me to keep it together." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," I said, my voice steady. "I've done my research. You've been embezzling HOA funds, falsifying documents, and covering it all up with your so-called regulations. And I'm not letting you get away with it." Her face went pale. "You have no idea what you're getting into," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The words hung in the air, and I could see the fear creeping in. She had been confident, almost arrogant before. But now I saw a crack in the armor. I stepped forward. "I've already gathered enough evidence to take this further. And believe me, I will. The longer you drag this out, the worse it's going to get for you. You're not just messing with a homeowner. You're messing with a federal officer." Karen swallowed hard, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to reach for her phone. But she stopped herself. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she repeated, but now there was a tremor in her voice. "I do," I said, my tone cold. "And it's over." For a long moment, Karen just stood there, breathing heavily as if she were trying to decide whether to break or to keep pushing. I watched her, waiting for her next move, and then it happened. Karen, the powerful HOA president, who'd made the lives of so many neighbors miserable, suddenly collapsed. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a deep sigh. "I didn't want it to go this far," she muttered under her breath. I didn't let up. "You're going to answer for what you've done, Karen. And if you don't step down and stop your behavior, I'll make sure the right people know exactly what you've been up to." For the first time, Karen didn't respond with anger. She looked defeated, and I could see it, the cracks in her facade. But as I turned to leave, I got one last shock. My phone buzzed with another message from that same unknown number. "You've made a mistake. This is just the beginning." The next few days felt like a ticking clock. I'd pushed Karen to the edge and she was scrambling, but I knew this was far from over. Every move I made, every step I took, seemed to be followed by an unseen force watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. I kept my head low, trying to focus on work, but the unease in the neighborhood grew. The once tight-knit group of residents was beginning to split. Some neighbors who had previously stayed quiet were now openly speaking out against Karen's leadership. Others were starting to get cold feet, unsure of which side to choose. It was like a pressure cooker, and I was bracing for the explosion. Then came the knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. And when I saw Mrs. Roberts standing there, her face pale and anxious, my heart sank. "Mr. Chandler," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk. It's about Karen." I invited her inside, and she quickly shut the door behind her as if she were worried someone might be watching. "What's going on?" I asked, already knowing it wasn't good. Mrs. Roberts took a deep breath, her hands wringing together nervously. "Karen's not backing down. She's been trying to intimidate everyone who's spoken up, and she's started threatening people who've cooperated with you even. I don't think she's going to stop unless she's forced to." I raised an eyebrow. "Threatening people how?" "Calls, texts, you name it," she continued, her voice shaking. "She's telling people that if they don't keep quiet, they'll lose their homes or worse. She's even mentioned using her connections to make things disappear. I don't know exactly what that means, but it doesn't sound good." A cold chill ran down my spine. I knew Karen was dangerous, but this was beyond anything I expected. She wasn't just trying to control people anymore. She was threatening them in ways that could ruin lives. "I've had enough," Mrs. Roberts said, her voice steadying. "I don't care what she does, but I'm ready to take this further. We all need to stand together and fight back. She's not going to win this time." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the entire community that Karen had been manipulating for years. And if we were going to expose her, it wasn't going to be easy. "We need to gather everything, every bit of evidence we can find," I said, already planning my next steps. "I've been keeping records, but we need more. We need to prove this is bigger than just one person's dispute." Mrs. Roberts nodded. "I can help. I've been documenting everything too. And I've got a few neighbors willing to step forward. But we need to make sure Karen doesn't know what we're doing. She'll stop at nothing to shut us down." We spent the next few hours putting together a strategy, gathering documents, recording conversations, and compiling everything we had. It was clear that Karen's actions were no longer limited to petty HOA disputes. This had turned into a full-blown conspiracy, one that involved embezzling funds, illegal threats, and corruption that reached far beyond the neighborhood. By the end of the day, we had a small team of residents ready to speak out. They were nervous, unsure of the consequences, but determined. We were going to expose Karen for who she really was, and no amount of threats would stop us now. The following morning, I made the call. The State Attorney General's office needed to hear about Karen's actions. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but we had the evidence. As I waited for the call to connect, I checked my phone. Another message from that same unknown number. "You're making a huge mistake. If you continue down this path, things will get ugly." I clicked my phone off and took a deep breath. The stakes were higher than ever, but there was no turning back now. We were in this together, and we were going to win. Just then, my phone buzzed again. It was a call from the Attorney General's office. "Mr. Chandler, we've reviewed your documentation. We're taking this seriously, and we'll begin an investigation into your claims. But we need you to be prepared for a long battle. The people we're dealing with are powerful. I didn't hesitate. I'm ready. And I've got a lot of people on my side. The investigation had officially begun. What started as a small dispute over a parking spot had turned into a full-scale battle to uncover corruption that ran deep within the HOA and beyond. I'd already known that Karen's influence stretched far, but I had no idea just how far she was willing to go to protect her empire. In the weeks that followed, the pressure mounted. Every time we thought we had enough evidence to bring her down, there was always more: hidden funds, fake contracts, and even a network of connections that included local officials who had been turning a blind eye to Karen's activities. But we kept pushing, documenting every move she made, every threatening message, and every sign of corruption that we uncovered. Karen had become desperate. She'd started to take more drastic measures, trying to silence witnesses, making threats that were too specific to ignore, and using her influence to intimidate anyone who dared question her authority. But we were ready for it. We knew that exposing her wasn't going to be easy, but it had to be done. Then, everything came to a head. One evening, just as I was sitting down to review the latest batch of documents, my phone rang. It was Detective Simmons. "Mark, you're going to want to get down to the office. We've got a break in the case." My heart raced as I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. I had no idea what new evidence we'd found, but I knew this was the turning point. When I arrived, Detective Simmons was waiting for me with a folder in hand. "We've got it," she said, handing me the folder. "The full picture. Karen and her associates are going down." As I flipped through the pages, I saw it. The full scope of Karen's operation. It wasn't just embezzling funds. It was money laundering, bribery, and even tampering with zoning laws to increase property values for people who were in on the scheme. "The evidence was damning. Is this it?" I asked, stunned by what we had uncovered. "We can finally take her down." Simmons nodded. "It's all here. We've got her. But now we need to act fast. She's got powerful people behind her, and if we wait too long, she might be able to cover it up." We worked late into the night, finalizing the details of the investigation and coordinating with state and federal authorities. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about taking down the entire corrupt network that had been feeding off the community for years. The next morning, we moved in. Coordinated arrests were made and Karen was taken into custody. As she was led away in handcuffs, her face was a mix of rage and disbelief. She couldn't comprehend how things had gotten so out of control. But it was over. The reign of terror she had built through fear and manipulation had crumbled in the blink of an eye. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly started to heal. The residents who had been afraid to speak out began to take back control, and for the first time in years, they felt like they were truly a part of the community. The HOA was restructured, with a new board that was transparent and accountable to everyone. For me, it was a strange mix of relief and pride. I'd fought for justice, not just for myself, but for the entire neighborhood. And as I stood in front of the community center at the grand reopening ceremony, I couldn't help but feel like we'd won something bigger than a simple parking dispute. But even as we celebrated, I knew there was always more work to be done. Corruption doesn't disappear overnight. It takes people willing to stand up and say enough is enough. And if I learned anything from this experience, it's that one person can make a difference. If you've ever had to stand up against an authority figure who was abusing their power, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It takes courage, it takes persistence, but most of all, it takes a willingness to do what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Subscribe and share if you believe in holding people accountable. And let me know in the comments about your own experiences with power abuse. We all have a role to play in making our communities better.